You know, Jesus made himself very plain to me on a number of levels, and it was just before my 18th birthday that I surrendered to him. And then
why don't you take us? Why don't you kind
Sure.
of go back and take us through that journey?
Well, I mean, a number of things for people maybe to know. I grew up in central Wisconsin. I didn't grow up in inner city Chicago where I live now. I was born in Beaver Dam, which is a town of about, at that time, 12,000 people. I think it's about 15,000 there now. And south central Wisconsin, farming community. My dad made a lot of money in Chicago and then in Milwaukee. Met my mother. He'd been driving truck. He was a terminal manager for a large trucking company, and they offered him a better job than that, making more bucks, and he wanted to be around his family more, so he said no, quit. Started his own business. About a year later, partner ran off with all the cash in the safe and never saw him again. Within another year or so, he had a series of operations on the base of his spine, and we lost everything, and moved from house to house, and a lot of hunting and fishing where I come from, but we did it to eat and to live. My mother started committing adultery on my dad. She went to the city, Milwaukee, to try to pay bills, got a good job down there, came back on the weekends. Our family basically fell apart. I was the youngest of 3 kids.
And this happened when you were about how old?
Well, they divorced when I was 9.
Okay.
But things caved in from the time I was about 6 or 7.
Okay.
And just frayed. You know, my sister was out with her girlfriends and eventually boyfriends, and my brother was doing the same, hanging out with his buddies, and you know, I kind of raised myself, which nobody raises themselves. You know. So moved to the city when I was 9 to Milwaukee with my mom, and she divorced my dad, and I suppose at that point in time I started getting into sexual addictions. Let's just say that the neighbors were all involved in incest, and I got involved with one of their sisters or 2 of their sisters, and you know, it's just a mess. You know, it's just a mess when you're trying to find love.
Yes.
And what you're finding is sex, which doesn't necessarily mean you're finding love. You know, my wife Wendy has a whole AskWendy.com, yeah, with Wendy with an I, and she does a whole thing on dating and sex and relationships, web pages, and teaches on it and stuff.
Ask Wendy with an I, WENDI.com, right? Because I saw that website.
Yeah.
Lots of great stuff.
She's
on
amazing. Well, she went through a different set of situations. Like, she grew up in the church. I grew up with no church, but she was abused by her grandfather and went through a whole series of things. I mean, when I was a kid, in my day, these things didn't happen, or if they did, nobody talked about them. Nobody knew about them. But I'm thinking that they probably happened more often than we knew. And anyway, so I got very caught up, very addicted, and as time went on, 12 years old, got interested in music, bugged the old lady to get me a guitar and an amp. She did. I started learning from a friend of mine, just basic chords and figuring out where the notes were on the neck, and got involved in bands. So now it's sex and drugs.
Right.
You know.
It's escalated, but
with the music, you know.
I just want you to, if you could just go back a little bit, when you talked about your parents getting a divorce.
Yeah.
And in a society where 1.5 out of every 2 marriages ends up in divorce, and I see a lot of these children myself.
Sure.
I deal with them. Can you remember what you felt like during that time and articulate that?
Yep, easy, miserable. I think I got along better with my dog than my mother or father. And I didn't understand what was going on. I was too young to really grasp. I could feel that the family was unraveling, but I didn't know, like, I couldn't judge our family on the basis of other families. We didn't connect with anybody hardly. I mean, nobody was ever home. My father was gone most of the time at that point. He was working, you know, a couple hours away, and whatever. I think he just gave up on the family. I think he felt pretty devastated, and he made a wrong choice in not hanging out with his sons and his daughter. They were just kids. They were, you know, in their late teens. They just wanted to be out and have fun. There wasn't any mom and dad around to stop them, so they did. So I mean, I'd come walking in this little house on the edge of town in the middle of nowhere, in the dark, and I was scared to death of the dark. And actually, that's how I started singing. I started singing because I was so spooked out by the darkness. And I'd reach around these little push button lights in this old farmhouse up on a hill. So check this out. I'm walking outside of this little town where we live, Fox Lake, Wisconsin, 1,181, little town, you know. I remember because I passed the sign every day going to school. I walk up, and the last house, just before our house, which is up on this hill, 2 or 3 trees, plowed under cornfield, you know, pitch black. The last street light ended a block away, and I'm freaking out of the dark. The last house I passed before our house, a lady had hung herself. Some 80-year-old lady had hung herself, committed suicide, you know, the year before we moved in. That house was empty. So I'm walking past that house. I started singing, you know. I just make up songs. Crawl in, turn on the light. I'd come home to an empty house.
Wow. When
Dylan sang in one of his songs, back in the 60s, it's a house, not a home. Absolutely.
You could relate to that.
Oh, man. When Hendrix said, there ain't no life nowhere, truest words I ever heard up until I heard the gospel.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah, I felt empty, miserable, angry, betrayed. I didn't know what love meant. I didn't understand commitment. I didn't, I mean, very confusing. So, for me, sex and music, and then eventually drugs, because a lot of my musician buddies were smoking dope, and you know, I read all this stuff, AMA reports.
Sure.
So I came in the other direction.
Sure.
I read all this stuff. I knew what was going to happen to me if I did dope, but I started doing it because why not? I mean, why not? I might as well have a little pleasure in life, kind of thing.
Sure.
That's where I was at.
Well, and if you don't understand what your destiny is, if you don't know what your identity is as a human being, then right, it just all sort of seems futile.
I mean, we evolved from a mud pack.
Right.
We have no purpose. I don't even know if we have value. I mean, when you talk about divorce and abortion, well then what's family? What does that mean? And why? Why? What's the point? And and so at that point I thought, well, okay, I'm worthless. Life is worthless. Get a little bit on the way out, I guess, you know. And I figured I'd probably just OD, and I did 3 times. I tried to kill myself. I went through, between the time I was 16 and 18, I did everything but run needles, everything but shooting heroin. I mean, I was very close to shooting smack when I came to the Lord, and also very close to being an alcoholic. I really had it down, you know, how to pop the malt liquor, and you know, there's a friend of mine who's been coming to Cornerstone Festival, which is one of the things we have an inner city church called Jesus People USA, and we do a lot of stuff in the inner city of Chicago. But one of the things we've done since 1984 is this really huge music and teaching and arts festival called Cornerstone. Well, this guy was coming for years with his son, and never once, never once did he come up out of the crowd and say, "I'm here," you know. His name was Butch. Butch was in a band with me and my cousin, called Misery's Sons. I'm not kidding you. I don't know where these names, I didn't name the band, but I completely relate. And we were doing blues and rock and jam band stuff back in the late 60s, early 70s, before I became a Christian. One night, there was a dope party, and there were so many, you know, back in the freak days, hippie days, everybody was so fried. This is in Milwaukee, right close to UWM campus. I mean, smoke was rolling out the door. I remember throwing up and seeing 4 of everything. I was so loaded. I'd been drinking and smoking dope and drinking and smoking dope and smoking hash and dropping acid and just all day, all day, all day. Finally, the last thing I remember is I was in the bathtub because a cop had come to the door and said we need to turn the noise down. I mean, I don't know why he didn't just bust us. There was more dope rolling out that door. I mean, there's no way he couldn't smell it. And everybody kind of went, uh-oh, there's a cop, you know, walked into the bathroom. I'm like in the bathtub with 4 or 5 people I don't know, or just shut the curtain. I mean, you know, you're not going to get away from the cops.
Sounds
I mean, what
real
are you doing?
surreal, you know.
Hello? We were all so loaded.